Hey, welcome. My name is Matthew Schmaltz, and I'm the founding editor of the Journal of Global Catholicism at the College of the Holy Cross. And it's my great pleasure to introduce today Richard Wood, who is president of the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And so Rich, if we may, was raised in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and originally studied chemistry, later theology and sociology, receiving his PhD from Berkeley in 1995. He is the co-author and author of several dozen scholarly articles and book chapters on social movements, the sociology of religion, political sociology, and democratic theory, many of them focusing on faith-based and broad-based community organizing efforts as case studies or for quantitative data analysis. He's the author of Faith in Action, Religion, Race, and Democratic Organizing in America, which was named Best Book of the 2002 selection from the American Sociological Association, and he's co-author with Brad Fulton of A Shared Future, Faith-Based Organizing for Racial Equity and Ethical Democracy, which was named Best Book of 2015 by the Association for Research on Nonprofits and Voluntary Action. He serves as co-editor of the book series Cambridge Studies in Social Theory and Religion and Politics at Cambridge University Press, and previously served as faculty president, senior vice provost, and interim provost at the University of New Mexico. Richard Wood, welcome.
Delighted to be here with you, Dr. Schmalls, and I'll go with Matthew from here
Yeah,
forward.
please
Uh,
go with Matt or
we'll,
Matthew.
we'll end
And
the formality.
I just gave a very general overview of your academic record and your professional accomplishments, of which there are many. Could you talk a little bit about the backstory, why you're interested in what you're interested in, and how you moved essentially from studying chemistry, it seems to me, to becoming involved in Catholic studies?
Well, I'd love to, and I'll try to keep this part brief. It's
Yeah.
delightful to be here with you. That's an overly generous introduction. Thank you. I mean, really, what I've done is collaborated with some really great thinkers, both in the academy and in grassroots work, to try to bring the Catholic voice into issues in society from the grassroots, from institutions, from universities, from social movement. Have loved my career. So it's great to be here. And, most of my career has been in secular settings. And this was a chance towards the end of my career to spend some years really trying to think with the church, give back to the church in ways that reflect just how important it's been in my life. So thanks for having me. So
Yeah.
yeah, born and raised in Los Alamos, weird background. My dad's a theoretical physicist at the national laboratories there where the nuclear weapons were
Mm.
first developed. Growing up there, if you have any talent at all, the assumption is you go into science. So I did, not knowing anything. Loved science originally, but while I was in college at the University of California, Oscar Romero was assassinated, Archbishop of San Salvador. Nothing in my background helped me understand how that happened. So through local campus ministry, the local Newman Center there, got very involved in understanding that and doing some solidarity work with Central America. And that gradually led me out of chemistry into some concern for social issues. I ended up going to Mexico to work what I thought for a year while I was applying to medical school, but found I loved what I was doing and stayed in Mexico and Central America, living in kind of marginal communities, working with grassroots church for about 4 years. Um, but the way I would describe amazing years, some of the
Mm.
most beautiful sides of the Church of Latin America in the 1980s. Um, but the kinds of theological answers, the kinds of political answers that were convincing to me as a fairly naive 23-year-old going there just kind of weren't convincing anymore. I knew I needed to study more, learn more. So I was tired. It was very intense work in the middle of the civil wars there.
Sure.
So I went back to the US to study theology initially. thinking about the role of spirituality in American and Latin American Catholic thinking. Um, and then transferred to UC Berkeley and studied under Bob Bella and Ann Swidler there, really great thinkers out of the Catholic and Jewish traditions, about the role of religion in public life and shaping a society in which everybody can thrive. While there, I knew I wanted to write about the role of faith and spirituality and religion in sort of sustaining social participation, and discovered this whole world of faith-based community organizing in the US. Ended up writing a dissertation and a book out of that called Faith in Action. So I've spent much of my career thinking about those kinds of questions, thinking about within settings of faith-based organizing, what happens when an organization decides to really commit to being a racial equity organization but has been sort of predominantly white in its leadership. And so I've written about that, written about the role of people of color in making those kinds of shifts happen, written about how religious people collaborate with secular people. So all that was a 30-year career at the University of New Mexico. But about a year ago, I learned that the presidency of this Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies in Southern California, at the University of Southern California, the presidency had come open and was hired by the board. And it has been just a fabulous experience of really thinking with other scholars, thinking with other leaders in other kinds of institutions about how the Catholic intellectual tradition can really contribute to some of the key issues facing our society. So love what I'm doing. Great to be here with you all. Thanks for having me.
Okay. We'll talk about what your view is of what contribution Catholic thought can make to the kinds of issues you've talked about in a couple minutes, because I'd really encourage you to be expansive about that and talking about it. But share with us something about the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies, its origins and its mission, and also some of its current projects.
Sure. Um, so the Institute was founded about 20 years ago by Father Jim Heft. He's a Marianist priest and a scholar and intellectual and taught at University of Dayton for many years and been a university leader there. And his diagnosis, along with an amazing team of Catholic intellectuals, really top folks, John Noonan, Charles Taylor, Margaret Archer, Robert George, some just eminent scholars, was that the Catholic Church in America had done an amazing job building out these institutions, colleges, and universities that are doing really great teaching, really great research. But what was missing was a kind of higher level institute focused on the Catholic intellectual tradition. They would be sort of parallel to the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton in science, or the National Center for the Humanities, or the Hoover Institute in politics, sort of convening Catholic scholars to think at the very leading edge of scholarship about important issues. And I think what we want to do is not do that by ourselves, do that in collaboration with other centers at other universities, to really create a network that can play that role in American life. And the way I would describe my role is just to continue that tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about the balloons. I don't know what
Well,
that
that's
was.
a positive commentary on what you're saying.
Okay. Continue that sort of focus on real scholarly work, collaboratively with other institutions and other universities, other centers like your own, and refract it a bit through a little bit of a practical angle where on any given project, there might be some really thoughtful practitioners out of faith-based organizing, out of politics, out of the church, out of business, to give it some real relevancy to current issues. And use social media to help draw more attention to our work. We're never going to become a huge social media operation, but we want to use social media to reach out to other scholars and institution leaders, to students, to church leaders, to draw more attention to some of that Catholic thinking that's out there.
Okay. So talk about some of the major themes that you see that are important within Catholic studies as it's practiced now, and particularly what you're doing at the Institute in terms of your own programming
Right.
to, identify particular areas of interest and collaboration.
So one thing we do is help the kind of advanced formation of Catholic graduate students and other graduate students interested in the kind of themes from the Catholic tradition that we're addressing. So we call that the Generations in Dialogue program. We've had a series of those. Next year, we think is going to be on medical ethics and especially around the cutting edge realities of artificial intelligence and the way they're being integrated into the human brain, CRISPR technology, the gene editing
Right.
technology, and what Catholic ethics might have to say about that. And that sort of convenes graduate students with senior scholars. The programmatic stuff we're doing is really exciting, I think. One has to do with artificial intelligence and its incredible emerging impact on everything in human society. And drawing Catholic ethicists and other careful thinkers about society and technology, thinking about how that's happening, what's actually enormously exciting, has great potential for doing good in the world, but also the terrific dangers embedded in that whole project. And we think the Catholic tradition, 2,000 years of Catholic ethical thinking, it doesn't have expertise on artificial intelligence, but the Catholic tradition has deep expertise on human society, on the human person, and I think has a lot to offer to thinking about that question. A second project that we're excited about, given my background, but also the international tensions right now with Russia, with China, with Iran, with North Korea, with the United States. Thinking about the nature of nuclear weapons, the nature of the threat of nuclear weapons, and in the world we live in now, including with all these advanced technologies that can launch nuclear weapons unintentionally, what's the smartest strategy for the smartest strategy for national security in this moment with all the threats that are out there? You know, the United States posture is one of very, very strong nuclear deterrence, meaning massively armed with nuclear weapons, developing a whole new generation of extraordinarily powerful nuclear weapons. And the Catholic tradition has developed this whole line of thought, beginning with the American bishops in the 1980s, but now very deep in Catholic social teaching from the Vatican.
Mm.
John Paul, Benedict, Francis have all spoken to this. And the Archbishop in New Mexico, John Charles Wester, has written a really powerful pastoral letter calling the question about the morality of developing the nuclear stockpile still further and calling for multilateral, verifiable disarmament. So it's not a simple-minded call to disarm in the face of the various threats, but for really serious work on disarmament. And there's been no real conversation between the Catholic thinking on disarmament and the strategic thinking on deterrence. We're convening a meeting in September where we're going to bring together deep thinkers on both those levels that aren't talking to each other a lot and try to convene a really good conversation about the best strategy going forward. A third project is around threats to democracy and the already emerged authoritarianism and white supremacy in the world today. And we'll be doing work with that in collaboration with some of the faith-based organizing world and scholars who are thinking about that. Then the last couple are, I think, of interest to you and your global Catholicism
Mm.
hat. We're working on helping to extend some of the North-South networks
Excellent.
between the US and Europe and Latin America and Africa and East and South Asia. There's a lot of smart scholarship coming out of all those settings. The dynamism of the Catholic Church in Latin America and Africa is phenomenal. And that's partly intellectual work. It's also just the pastoral life of the church. We want to help convene networks that help scholars think across those boundaries particularly about what it means to build a truly global Catholicism that's truly enculturated in various cultures, truly faithful to the tradition, but extending the tradition, thinking about it carefully so it's not just a Eurocentric tradition, it's a truly global tradition. I think that's a really good, we're in the very early stages of that, but we think it's important.
Excellent. I mean, there are a lot of specific questions that I have, but maybe first a more general one. You've talked about all these exciting programs that you have sponsored and that you intend to sponsor. What do you think are the challenges? And I don't mean logistical challenges in terms of academic institute, but I mean challenges at least in relation to what I see as the extreme polarization of Catholicism within this country and bringing Catholics together who who come from different sides of the aisle, shall we say, when it comes to the intellectual life, does present a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering how you work through those kinds of challenges, or how you in your own experience, especially with Catholic work on social justice and sociology and so forth, how you understand how this polarization plays out in terms of the Catholic intellectual life.
Yeah. So let me at least start with three challenges. The third one will be the one you just named.
Okay, great.
One is just doing this coherently, right? I just described this huge intellectual terrain. I have no illusions that I'm going to become an expert on all those terrains. So it's always going to be collaborative. It's always going to be dialogical. We'll help convene folks. We'll help raise resources for this work, but it's going to be smart scholars specializing on those terrains, thinking together to do this work. A second challenge has to do with well, and by the way, sorry, on that first challenge, and it's not just going to be folks from United States and Canada.
Right.
We really want to draw on thinkers from other settings around the world. The second challenge has to do with the reality of this amazing system of American colleges and universities. But we're all a little protective of our own turf. That's natural. It's
Mhm.
it's inevitable maybe. There's a challenge there in convening these kind of broad collaborative work. And so I just want to say we have no illusions that somehow we become top dog in this system, or that somehow the institute is more important or higher than other institutes. We're part of a group of institutes that are all doing really interesting, important work. And I think together we can add up to much more than this kind of fragmented reality that we live in now. Um, I think we play well with others. I'm totally into giving broad credit for a lot of people collaborating on any given thing. I'd like to invite us all to sort of move beyond the small worlds we inhabit and try and think together about a bigger world of the Catholic Church and also a bigger world beyond Catholicism. The third challenge you offer is a deep one. It's one we all face. How do you convene these conversations in a world and a church that are so deeply polarized as in this moment? It's certainly not going to be by encouraging everyone to yell more loudly at each other in church or in society. That's getting us nowhere. I also don't think it's about sort of a middle position, a compromise. Um, there's strong points of view and there's deep critiques from various points on the spectrum that sort of compromise doesn't get at. The image I would use is sort of deep thinking that provides a broader view of the terrain that helps us think across some of those conflicts. Or I like the image of Charlie Camosi at uh, who's thinks of
Fordham?
he runs a project called the Magenta Project.
Right.
The image of magenta being the mixture of red and blue
Hmm.
that isn't a compromise, it's a deeper color, it's a vibrant kind of thinking that helps us think beyond our current impasses, gets to fundamental questions that maybe interrogate both sides of some of these polarities. I think that's a nice image for what we want to do, what we all need to be doing. Because at the end of the day, what's going to get us beyond the current fragmentation and the current polarization is deeper, more careful thinking, a deeper commitment to sort of a shared future that we can all inhabit intellectually, societally. That's the project I want to contribute to, and I want to invite other folks into.
Great. So to springboard off of that, where do you see the Institute in 5 years? Or what do you hope that the Institute will be or become 5 years from now?
So in 5 years, I'd like us to be one node
Mhm.
in the national and global network of Catholic scholarly centers that are, centers of true intellectual work and intellectual work that understands itself in dialogue with the wider society, addressing the key challenges facing humanity. We haven't talked about climate change at all, right? That's, of course, an existential threat like authoritarianism and anti-democracy and white supremacy. I'd like to see us as one node in that kind of a network, and also in a network that's truly thinking with the church. I think there's an important intellectual independence that we all have as scholars, that we're not sort of just doing the Catholic theology, but I think we need theologians and humanists and scientists and social scientists and legal scholars and medical scholars drawing on our own expertise to think with the church, drawing on 2,000 years of tradition, but also interrogating that tradition to position the church to really be the voice in what I would call public Catholicism, thinking with a world beyond Catholicism, to call it to its truest self, to call the church to its truest self, to be the kind of leaven that the world so desperately needs today.
Or let's imagine someone who's not Catholic, an academic, asks you, well, what particular intellectual contribution can Catholicism make to current discussions? What are the specific themes within Catholicism that you think are particularly relevant? I mean, you've talked about a variety of projects that the Institute has that are drawing upon the Catholic tradition. I just ask you to be a little more specific about what Catholic thought, Catholic religious practice can contribute to some of the questions that you identified as being important.
Great question, profound question, Matthew. Let's start not on the scholarly stuff, but the last part of your question on Catholic religious practice, whether that's scholars engaged in Catholic worship or people doing other things with their lives. The central ritual of Catholicism in the Eucharist is this deeply interior, deeply spiritual encounter with what we understand as God's presence in our lives, in the world, in our communities, in bread and wine. And what that does is constitute us as persons in relationship to the Spirit and the divine, but also, right, it's all of us as equals partaking of the body and blood, constitutes us as social creatures in a community, embedded together in that community. That is so profoundly countercultural in this postmodern moment of individual branding, of the ego at the center, to constitute that social identity, that's not a Catholic truth. That's the deep truth of human evolution. We are social animals. And kind of hardline libertarianism to the contrary, we're only going to make progress if we understand ourselves as social animals. And I think Catholic religious practice embodies that in a really important way that has something to offer the world. Intellectually, I think there's a lot. One I would offer is the kind of tradition of subsidiarity, of thinking and acting at the most grassroots level that makes sense to act out on any given issue. in a world of gargantuan corporations, gargantuan government, that tradition of local action, local thought, matters, I think. Whether you're on the left or the right, the sort of colonization of our communities by the logic of profit and the logic of power are deeply destructive of the life worlds we live in and the communities that matter, of families, as we're seeing on our streets. I think that tradition matters. A kind of counterintuitive thing I think Catholicism offers, counterintuitive because, it's a moment we're emerging from deep abuse of Catholic authority in the sex abuse scandals and in the authority scandals associated with that. There is, let's not pretend there's not a history of Catholic authoritarianism in the church and in the wider society. But at its best, Catholicism is not an authoritarian tradition, but it's not a libertarian tradition. It's an authoritative tradition.
Mm,
It places the onus on individuals to form their conscience, to live within the church, think with the church, but that ultimately the person has primacy on their own conscience in dialogue with an authoritative tradition called Catholic morals, Catholic teaching, Catholic social teaching. In a society that's so deeply anti-institutional today, that rejects all forms of authority, I think that nuanced Catholic stance that says authorities have to be accountable to people, have to be accountable to serving everyone, but they have legitimacy. That experts bring a certain kind of authority, that elected officials bring a certain kind of authority, that church leaders bring a certain kind of authority, and that we need to listen and respond to that and be in dialogue with that. And Francis's project is extraordinarily important on this, right? All the weird language around synodalism and synodality and the synod aside, the project is crucial. He's trying to create not a small d democratic church. I don't think that's his project.
mm,
He's trying to create a church that preserves the deep tradition of legitimate authority, apostolically descended authority, but that asks that authority to listen really carefully to Catholics at the margins, to Catholics in parishes, to Catholics in business and universities, hear their experience as part of their leadership of the church. Um, that's a powerful tradition. We're watching the sort of destructiveness of knee-jerk rejection of authority on the extreme right and in parts of the extreme left. That's going to get us nowhere as a society. I, of course, have my own sympathies in various social issues, but
mm.
the knee-jerk rejection of expertise and authority is not going to get us anywhere. Catholicism offers a more careful way to think about that I think matters.
Okay, wonderful. And very persuasive, defense, or shall we say, apology for Catholic thought. I think in an age where at least I found in secular institutions that there is, a sense that Catholic thought, is not necessarily an authentic dialogue partner for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And so
And
in some sense, you have to encounter and engage that. Yeah.
I think we have to engage it, and the argument I just tried to lay out, the apologetics, if you
Mm,
will, is only going to be convincing if we're also honest enough, humble enough, if you will, as recent popes have been, to acknowledge there's some deep sinfulness in our own experience as church, as
mm,
institution. Um, we owe and we're accountable to history of being in bed with colonial projects that destroyed whole societies, being in bed with projects of white supremacy in this country sometimes, being in bed with a kind of um, women as in some sense less than men, at least in terms of leadership and governance. And we just have to name that. And the Institute for Advanced Catholic Studies is independent enough to be able to name that honestly. And the Catholic leadership has been honest enough to apologize for that.
Mhm.
You know, apologies only get you into a conversation. They don't make up for all the harm done. The next step is really trying to be part of projects that address the harm done. And we want to be part of that intellectually and in society.
So to conclude, can you talk a little bit about any personal plans that you have? I know that you're off to Africa quite soon, and you just share with us what
Yeah,
the immediate future holds for you and the Institute.
sure. So, you know, the Africa trip is one part of a wider trip that's really trying to not build, but extend existing networks of scholars working on this terrain. You know, we're building an academic advisory committee and a wider group of affiliated scholars. We would invite anybody interested to join the affiliated scholars group. You know, there's amazing folks out there. Katie Holster and Timothy Mattavino in sort of the Catholic studies world. So I'm going to think about Catholic studies really broadly.
Sure.
Reaching out to Tia Noel Pratt and Brian Massengale about Black Catholicism, Catholicism more widely, what we have to learn from the history and ongoing reality of racism in the church. Hosman Ospino and Leo Guardado and David Lantigua and Nancy Pineda Madrid about not just, or and Roberto Goizueta, not just sort of Latino Catholicism in this country, but what the Hispanic, Latin American, Latino side of Catholicism offers the global church that's so important intellectually. Michelle Dillon, Jerome Baggett, Trisha Adler, Trisha Bruce, Gary Adler, sociologists thinking about Catholicism in the contemporary world and how it can really thrive in a post-secular culture that's learned to really interrogate tradition, but also interrogate secularism. What does Catholicism offer there? Those are exciting things. So I love what I'm doing, but I also love fly fishing, love skiing, love basketball. So I'm still doing some of that. I'm still writing, doing some papers in Rome in the next few months that I'm
Mhm.
excited about. Listening with the church, kind of faith-based organizing and Comunidades Eclesiales de Base, based Christian communities in Latin America,
Mhm.
as ways the church already knows lots about listening and can draw on as it enters this new era of a more synodal church. And I want to be partners with a whole bunch of folks like you, Matthew.
Mhm.
There's a lot of good thinkers, good folks in the academy and in the church. Reach out if you'd like to be in touch. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Richard Wood, and best wishes and safe travels. And we look forward to the work of the Institute as it develops, because you've really hit upon some really important issues, and to have a center that of dialogue and networking that brings people together to talk about these important issues is so crucial, particularly with at our intellectual and historical moment. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the chance. Blessings all. Bye now.
Yeah.